Roundtable discussion. My name is Tracy Coppola, and I'm the Colorado Senior Program Manager for the National Parks Conservation Association. And I'm really thrilled to share the space with so many incredible people all around in this virtual space. Department of Interior Secretary Deb Haaland, Senators Bennett and Hickenlooper, Congressmen Neguse and Buck, and Amache survivors, Mr. Ken Kitajima and Mrs. Carlene Tinker. Amache descendants, Derek Akubo, Mitch Homa, and Calvin Hada. Stacy Shigaya with the Sakura Foundation in Denver. Alexa Roberts, who is the former superintendent of the Sand Creek Massacre National Historic Site in Eads, Colorado, and now with the Sand Creek Massacre Foundation. And last but certainly not least, Mr. John Hopper, the founder of the Amache Preservation Society in Grenada, Colorado. So this is a week of special significance for Amache. We're gathering here on the eve of the National Day of Remembrance. Tomorrow marks the 80th anniversary of the signing of Executive Order 9066, which led to the forcible and unconstitutional incarceration of Japanese Americans during World War II. We're here to honor that and reflect on that. We're also gathering to reflect and celebrate what has been an absolutely incredible week for the bipartisan Amache National Historic Site Act, with Monday night's unanimous passage of the bill in the US Senate. And this morning, I just had to update these remarks. This morning, we got a final unanimous passage in the House and off to the president's desk for signature soon. I want to give space to our congressional champions to talk about that a bit more. But the dream of Amache becoming an official unit of the National Park Site will come true thanks to your leadership. So I am so grateful for our shared space today and to listen and learn from you all, and of course to honor the Amache community. And with that, it's my privilege to hand this off to Secretary Haaland.
Is that
Madam Secretary.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, you want to stand here and help me with the hearing? My hearing is so bad.
Thank you for that kind introduction, Tracy, and for everything you and the National Parks Conservation Association do in service to our mission at the Department of the Interior. And good afternoon, everyone. And thank you all so much for joining us as we remember one of the most somber times in our history. And thank you to Colorado's congressional leaders for inviting me to join this event. I'm so grateful to be here. To the survivors and descendants of Amache, thank you for being here today. Thank you, Mr. Ken Kitajima, for being here today. Thank you for sharing your stories, for helping us learn about this painful chapter in our nation's history, and for continuing to lead by example. I know what it's like to feel compelled to tell your story so that it can never be forgotten. I also know that reliving our trauma is never easy. You not only bear the burden of this history, but you also bear the burden of sharing it. I am truly grateful to bear witness to your experiences and to have the honor of visiting Amache tomorrow. As we approach the 80th day of remembrance, we honor the business owners, school teachers, farmers, and young children who were taken away from their homes and communities and incarcerated at sites run by the federal government. When I reflect on this, I think of the mothers who had to explain to their children why they couldn't play beyond barbed wire fences, or where their toys had gone, or why men with guns patrolled the place where they were taken to live. Though children are resilient and make the best of any situation, they must have been confused at the very least to move away from their friends, eat unfamiliar foods, and essentially be caged like criminals without knowing what they did wrong. But what's even more devastating is the time that was stolen. Nothing can make up that time. As some of you may know, I am intimately familiar with the forced removal of families from their homes. My maternal grandparents were stolen from their families when they were only 8 years old and were forced to live in boarding schools away from their parents, culture, and communities until they were 13. To heal from these types of historical wounds that we carry, it takes a deep reckoning with these truths and a recognition that they have generational impacts. Through my role as secretary, I see it as my responsibility to honor the communities and the history that is often underrepresented and is not given the time in history classes, because this history is American history, and all of us have an obligation to know it. I'm proud of the role that the National Park Service plays to honor this important history, including stewarding 6 former incarceration sites across the country. I'm thrilled that Congress has taken bipartisan action today to send a bill to the president to add the Amache site as the newest unit of the National Park System, number 424. What a special day and fitting action as we approach this 80th day of remembrance. Japanese American incarceration is a page in our history books that we may not be proud of, but that we must learn from, so that as a country, we never repeat those wrongs in any way, shape, or form. Thank you again for the chance to be with all of you today. I'll now turn the floor over to my friend and our esteemed Senator, Michael Bennett.
Thank you, Secretary Holland. And first, let me say how honored we are again to host you in Colorado. And you can keep coming back and coming back and coming back. We are profoundly grateful that you've decided to join us at Amache tomorrow to mark the 80th anniversary of Executive Order 9066. And the Secretary is talking about that order and the shameful chapter in our history. And I know the survivors of Amache and their descendants who join us today, and thank you for being here, that you need no reminder about what this has meant for you and for your families. You've carried the memory of Amache for 80 years, of the dislocation, the dispossession, the separation, and the heartbreaking experience of our country turning its back, not only on them, but everything we stand for as a nation. But the memory of Amache isn't only for the survivors and descendants to bear. It's the responsibility of every American to remember what happened there, so it can never happen again. And I've had the opportunity to visit Amache several times while I've been a senator. John Hopper was kind enough to take me around the site, which he and his students had maintained almost entirely on their own year after year. They knew how much it mattered to Colorado and to the country, and they hoped this day would come. It's the reason I am so grateful to have had the chance to work with my friends, John Hickenlooper, Congressman Buck, Congressman Neguse on the bill to establish within the National Park Service to ensure it will have the resources and recognition it deserves for years to come, forever. And the bill passed the House as Tracy mentioned, unanimously this morning, and a few days ago we passed it in the Senate. It's on its way to the president's desk for his signature. But more than anything we've done in Congress, this victory is a credit to all the survivors, descendants, and advocates who never gave up, who never stopped pushing. And it's a testament to Coloradans like John and his students who work year after year to keep the site going. This is your achievement, all of you. And thanks to you, future generations will have the opportunity to learn about the Americans of Amache, the men and women who held on to hope year after year, who supported one another, and who forged a community that lasts to this day behind the barbed wires of this site, and who never gave up on the United States of America, even as it was interring them on their own soil. Let me end by saying this is particularly meaningful for me because while Japanese Americans were detained at Amache, my mom and her parents were separated from each other in the same war. They were Polish Jews living near Warsaw, and their entire family was killed during the war with the exception of them. They managed to come here. and rebuild their shattered lives in the only country in the world where that was possible. And they loved this country not because it was perfect, but because it was imperfect. And all of us have an opportunity to make it better and move us closer to our highest ideals. And in my view, that's exactly what this bill is, a small step to doing. And we could never have accomplished it without your tenacity, your leadership, and your courage over many years. So I will stop there and turn it over to my friend, Senator Hickenlooper.
Thank you, Michael. And it's good to be with everyone today. And thank you, Tracy, for moderating. And Secretary Haaland, thank you so much for all the energy and attention you've given to Colorado. I'm especially grateful to the survivors and descendants and community members who are joining us today. Also, I want to recognize my colleagues in Congress, Representative Neguse and Buck and Senator Bennett, who did some remarkable negotiation on Monday to get this through the Senate. Of course, you know, the interning Japanese Americans during World War II is rightly remembered as a stain, a dark stain on our past. It was blatantly racist. It was a policy that spread hatred and fear, and certainly didn't add to America's safety. Racism that grew out of internment was so widespread, even those who supported it refused to host the camps in their own communities. And yet, most shocking is how easy it was for our government to forcibly move more than 120,000 Japanese Americans from their homes into camps. It's a reminder that our democracy is never stronger or durable, never more strong or more durable than the people who make it up. Whatever laws it comes down to, each one of us bears responsibility. Internment was a test of our democracy, as Michael said, a test that many, many Americans failed when they failed to stand up for their neighbors, their friends, in many cases, their fellow citizens. And that's why we can't afford to forget about Camp Amache. This didn't just happen somewhere else. It happened right here in Colorado. Now, our bill, which just passed the Senate on Monday, as Michael said, unanimously, is going to preserve Camp Amache as a National Historic Site, making it part of the national park system. And this bill is the fruition of years of hard work and determination by survivors, descendants, community members down in Grenada. I am so grateful for all those who supported and advocated for and worked on this bill to get it across the finish line. There are a few distinctions bestowed on places by our government that are more significant or longer lasting than that of a National Historic Site. And this one is long overdue. I was down there a couple of weeks ago with former Governor Romer. We got a tour of the museum with John Hopper, who you'll hear from in a minute. And it really was breathtaking. Roy Romer could not have been more eloquent in describing the persistence and the suffering and the struggle of the survivors and the descendants. So with that, I will turn it over to the indefatigable, speaking of tireless, Representative Joe Neguse.
Thank you, Senator Hickenlooper, as always, and thank you to everyone for joining us today. Of course, my good friend and former colleague, wonderful Secretary Haaland, who continues to do such an incredible job for our country. I'm looking forward to seeing her tomorrow with Senator Bennett and others at the Amache site. I want to say thank you to everybody for being with us to lift up and highlight America's story. The landscapes, cultural places, and stories that we choose to protect reflect our values as a nation. The story of Amache is an incredibly important one for all the reasons that you've heard from my distinguished colleagues. And that's why I am so excited that we've been able to get this done in less than a year for the people of Colorado. The credit, of course, goes to the survivors and the descendants and the advocates, all of whom, many of whom rather, are with us today on today's call. We are in your debt for all of your advocacy and everything you've done to lift up the story of Amache and to get us to the position that we are today. The Amache National Historic Site Act proves what we can accomplish when we work together across party lines for the people of Colorado. Congressman Buck and I introduced the House legislation in April of 2021. And of course, Senator Bennett and Senator Hickenlooper introduced the Senate companion. We have worked together over the course of this last year to do everything we can to get this bill to the president's desk. And in less than a year, simply unheard of in Congress these days, we were able to do that. And when we work together, when we listen, when we lead locally, we can accomplish a whole lot. And this bill proves it. And I certainly look forward to seeing President Biden sign it into law in the near future. I know that Bob Fujigama couldn't be with us today, but when we considered this bill in the House almost a year ago, we heard his powerful and moving testimony. Bob is a constituent of mine from Evergreen, Colorado, a Navy veteran who was one of the over 7,000 people unjustly detained in Amache. Bob was just 11 when his family was ordered to leave their home in less than 1 week with no explanation of their destination, and he would ultimately spend 3 years wrongfully imprisoned with no hearing or trial at the relocation center. While in Amache, his family lost everything: home, furnishings, land, farm equipment, everything. And his story, like many others, is told through the preservation of this site. He testified, as I mentioned, during the House subcommittee hearing on this bill, and I must tell you, it was the most moving testimony that I think any member of my committee had heard during their tenure. There wasn't a dry eye in the room. And with the designation of Amache as a National Historic Site, we hope that many more can now learn about his story and so many other stories like his. So again, I want to say thank you to the survivors, the descendants, Mr. Hopper, who I look forward to seeing tomorrow and meeting, and all of those who have made this possible. We are in your debt and we are grateful for your efforts. And with that, it gives me great pleasure to be able to introduce my good friend and my colleague who has worked with me so closely on this effort, among many others, and that's my neighbor to the east, Representative Ken Buck.
Thank you, Representative Neguse. I appreciate that. I want to just start off by thanking Senator Cory Gardner. Cory made me aware of the situation in Neguse. He was previously the congressman for the 4th Congressional District and did a great job of really highlighting, working closely with Mr. Hopper. And in large part because of his efforts, I got involved, and it's really been my pleasure to work with Congressman Neguse and Senator Hickenlooper and Senator Bennett on this project. Today we celebrate the good in America and we recognize the bad, and it's important for us to do both. We recognize that during the FDR administration, our country went through a number of racially divisive policies coming out of the administration, perhaps none more so than the policy involving the internment of Japanese Americans. But the other policies that occurred in the FDR administration, something we should learn from, and really the lessons of the past are so important to us. But that administration should take responsibility for this. It should fall nowhere else. And we should make sure that we never repeat those kinds of terrible mistakes. But we also celebrate today. We celebrate the events that led to the closing of Amache. We celebrate the outstanding work of the students and their leader, Mr. Hopper at Grenada High School. We celebrate the survivors and descendants and the great achievements that they've accomplished since leaving Camp Amache. I know in Weld County, my home county, we have a number of people who have been, who were descendants and a few survivors who have accomplished great things. And it's really a testament to the social structure that we have in this country that individuals can really achieve when they have been beaten down and recognize the beauty of this country. One of the most moving things that Mr. Hopper showed me when I was at Amache was a plaque of the individuals who had been incarcerated in Amache and were fighting for the United States in World War II. I think that says something really incredible about the patriotism of these people the folks who had been incarcerated, that they recognized that there still was a great country, a country worth fighting for, and really is the home of the free and the land of the brave, even under those circumstances. And it touched my heart so deeply to see that. But we also should celebrate the bipartisan work on this bill. My good friend Joe Neguse and I, we both kind of look askance at the Senate and the processes in the Senate, but we appreciate the end result of this bill, and we hope that many other bills can move forward like this bill did. But this bill was something that politics was put aside, and we did the right thing for the right reasons. Today, we recognize the resilience and the hard work of those who have come together to make this possible. I just want to say thank you, and I want to really emphasize, God bless America. Thank you. And I turn it over, I guess, to Tracy. I'm not sure who I should turn it over to.
That's perfect. Thank you very much, Congressman, and thank you all for your remarks. Congressman Neguse, I do want to say, you probably know that Mr. Fuchigami will be there in person tomorrow, so he'll have the honor of meeting you, and I know he's looking forward to that as well. I have a few questions for the roundtable now, and I'll open that up. My first question is to our treasured survivors who are in the room with us today, and that is Mr. Kitajima. So Ken, I'm going to ask you your question first, and then Carlene, you can answer, please, after Ken. So, as survivors of Amachi, what does the Day of Remembrance, as well as the bill to make Amachi a national park site, what does that mean to you personally? Mr. Kitajima, we can start with you if you like.
Tracy, can you have the admin unmute him?
I think that Kate is trying to do that. If he needs a little bit of time, Carlene, would you like to proceed?
Well, he's talking, he just doesn't know how to unmute. So
Okay.
if we can unmute everyone. He doesn't realize no one can hear
Yeah,
him.
it only allows me to ask him to unmute, so.
Do you want me to start, Tracy?
I think that would be good.
Okay.
My statement.
Oh, he's on.
Okay.
So,
Can I start?
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Oh, can I read my statement now?
Yes, sir. Thank you so much. Please.
Okay, it should take less than 5 minutes. This is Ken Kitajima, sheet number 1, preliminary comments to the printed Amachi Day of Remembrance virtual program. Here's my comments. When December 7, 1941 came, our family and Japanese relatives and friends suffered tremendously from that day forwardly. We experienced trauma that affected all of us socially, family interactions, psychologistic, family security, property, and financially. A couple of weeks after Pearl Harbor, my sister and I faced racist activity from our Campbell Grammar School life. We had many experiences of boys in our class start harassing us by calling us Japs. They harassed us on the school bus. Eventually, when we decided to walk home the 3 mile from school to avoid the bus. One day when my sisters and I started walking home down to Campbell Creek, 3 boys started throwing rocks at us and calling us dirty Japs. While we were running down at the bottom of the creek, the 3 boys were throwing more rocks from the cliff, which is about 20 to 30 feet high. One boy slipped and fell off the cliff. My sister said, we better help him. I said, no. And we ran home to our house and cried to our father. We told him about the harassment and said, we don't want to go to school, crying all the time. Our father said in Japanese, no, gakko ni ikimasu. In English means, no, you have to go to school. The time came after President Franklin Roosevelt signed Executive Order 9066. They gave us 2 weeks to get ready to move to the train with only what you can carry. To make the story short, leaving out many details, our family lost almost everything we owned. We ended up in Heart Mountain Camp And in January 1943, the WRA transferred our family to Amache camp, where all our relatives live. Now I will read you my final statement, the one I want to really record. NPC Amache Historic Site Project, February 18, 2022. Statement from Ken Kitajima, 91-year-old internee from Amache Camp, Block 10E, 11B. Personal statement. When the Japanese warlords bombed Pearl Harbor on December 7, 1941, President Franklin D. Roosevelt called it the Day of Infamy. Also the Day of Remembrance, when President Franklin D. Roosevelt signed the 3-page Executive Order 9066 on February 19, 1942, that changed the lives of 120,000 Japanese by allowing General DeWitt and his staff at San Francisco Office Club in San Francisco at the Presidio and U.S. government members to put 120,000 Japanese into 10 concentration camps with barbed wire fencing, guard towers with military men armed with rifles, machine guns, and searchlights. Most Japanese were citizens when General DeWitt, with his famous comment, "A Jap is a Jap," painted most of us a danger to the United States of America. Over the many recent years, I have found that millions of U.S. citizens, young school children, and young adults, and some old ones, knew little or nothing about the true history of the shameful act. I personally called February 19, 1942, the true Day of Infamy. Let's preserve through the National Parks Project the history of Amache as a true historic site for all who live in the greatest country in the world. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much. Honor you. Carlene.
Honored guest, fellow Amachian descendants. Thank you for having me this morning. Tomorrow, as Tracy pointed out, February 19th is a day of remembrance. Typically, every year we go through sponsors, we sponsor luncheons, we have speakers, but tomorrow will be the climax, the best day of remembrance, because we managed to get Amache passed to become a national park historic site. This is what we have worked for, and we have achieved it. Thank you for all of you who have done this for us. It'd be on February 19th when President Delano Roosevelt signed Executive 9066. He declared the West Coast as a military zone from which all enemy aliens should be removed because we were a threat to the safety of our country. I was 2 on February 1942. I was an enemy alien, not because of what I did, but because of what I look like. I look like the enemy. So my mother and father were also, in spite of being born here in the United States, were also enemy aliens. So what did that mean for us? That meant that we had to be evacuated, as someone pointed out, on very short notice. We were a threat to the security of the country. First, because the Amache and other incarceration camps were not built yet. We were assembled in several assembly centers. I was living in Los Angeles at the time with my parents, and we were moved to a Santa Anita racetrack. Many of us lived in horse stalls because that was what they were offering us as homes. I think it was probably in August. I think that's when the first movement of people leaving the West Coast for Amache actually started. I just turned 3. So there I was, a youngster, my parents without a job, not having their rights. We were looking forward to somehow surviving. We didn't know how long, what we were supposed to survive, how long we would be there, But here are some of the things as I look back from what they told me and what I've learned since then of what I remember Amache being. I remember my parents talking about the harsh environment, the extreme heat and cold as you people in Colorado suffer from. We in California have better weather. I remember the barrack and the apartment in which we lived, a very tiny apartment, 20 by 20 maybe, for the larger families, divided into two parts by an army blanket strung over a rope with a single light bulb as our light source. Our only heat was that potbelly stove. I remember the dust storms, which were unending since you guys are, or since we were at the edge of the Dust Bowl. My father, being the solicitous guy that he was, would put a scarf over my face, lift me on top of his shoulders, and we would go off marching to the mess hall 3 times a day for our meals because we could not cook in our apartments. I remember my father leaving the camp for months on end, looking for jobs, shoveling coal, working on the railroads. I remember my mom working in the onion fields. And I do remember very significantly in 2018, I was with the Amache Field School from Denver U. We excavated near Block 11F, and that turned out to be where I attended preschool. So I had a chance to relive my experience in that way by looking and excavating around that barrack. Recently, actually in last December, there's a very poignant project that was headed by Honorable Johnny Cepeda Gogo. He's a Superior Court judge in Santa Clara, California, and his idea to honor the Day of Remembrance was to go around to all of the 10 incarceration camps, taking World War II flags, 48 stars on them, and have survivors sign each of the stripes and or stars. Well, he came to Fresno, where I live now, on December 19th. I understand he was in Amache in August of 2021. Is that right, John? I do remember that. And so I, with 70 other survivors, got to sign that flag. And among others, there are 4 others that were signed that he took around with this project. I and others put our names. We put the years we were in camp. We put the names of our relatives. We put maybe our block and our apartment numbers, but that symbolized to them and to me particularly that we were signing on a flag that was in effect at that time. It represented the constitutional rights of those people who were being governed by that flag. So to me, symbolically, by us survivors putting our names on those stripes and or stars, we were validating our constitutional rights that in fact, we were Americans. Now, having Amache become a National Park Service unit is just, it's astounding. Because all of us, and I'm one of the younger survivors, all of us are going to be gone someday. We have to have somebody continue our story. And I believe it's the mission, the prime mission of the National Park Service to tell stories. Our story will be, we had 7,000 people here for 3 years who made the best of it. We were survivors. We persevered. We, in spite of being deprived of our rights, we managed to become persons later on to raise families in a very notable way. We need others to tell our stories. And so that's what Amache as a national parks will be able to tell to others who visit it. I was in Morro Bay recently, and I talked to one of my friends, a young man in his 40s. And I said, oh, you know, this is a huge week for me. I'm going to be celebrating the Day of Remembrance. And he said, what are you talking about? And I said, well, I, as a Japanese American, as a toddler, was put into an incarceration camp. Did you know anything about it? He said, no. Tell me about it. And I was amazed. I was actually appalled. So when people like I'm not saying he's, you know, he was ignorant, but we need to tell our story to people like this. And having Amache become a historic site will be able to tell the story to people who are not cognizant of what happened in this very dark, unforgettable, unforgivable period of life, period of history, that it should not have happened and it should not happen again. I want to thank Senators Michael Bennett, Senator Hickenlooper, Congressman Joe Neguse, and Congressman Buck, and especially Tracy for doing all that you have done to make all of this possible. This is going to be the best day of remembrance that I will ever experience. Thank you.
Thank you, Carlene. It's so wonderful to hear from you and have you in this space with us. And I can't wait to gather with you in person soon too. I have my next question to the Secretary Haaland and our congressional leaders. And there's a lot to unpack here, but the Amache movement stands on the shoulders of individuals like Ken and Carlene and Mr. Fujigami and all of the survivors who are with us today and those who are no longer with us. And years of advocacy within the Amache community, the survivors and the descendants. And this has all led to where we are today. What does this opportunity mean to each of you? And do you feel a particular sense of momentum and urgency right now in our country and in honoring and protecting this sacred place? Because clearly this legislative effort was just enormous and record speed, and we are so thankful, but it does seem like we're at a point now where there is a bit of urgency and opportunity. And I just wondered if you all could reflect on that in your leadership roles. And Madam Secretary, if we could start with you and then of course, open it up to the senators and congressmen, please.
Thank you, Tracy. And thank you so much, Carlene and Ken. And Carlene, you hit the nail on the head when you say it's the National Park Service's mission to tell America's story. And, you know, when I think about it, there's a lot of stories that we as Americans don't know. I feel very strongly that as an American citizen, of course, it's my obligation to know the history of these things. There is an urgency, of course. It is sad to think about the fact that the survivors of Amache, I mean, they're not, you know, we have children and grandchildren and folks like that to make sure that we're conveying this information to. And so there's always an urgency to make sure that we as a country are paying attention to the voices that we need to listen to the fact that Japanese American history is American history, that the gentleman that Carlene mentioned deserves to know and understand what his history is. You know, as secretary, of course, we want to make sure that America's story is told, but we also want to make sure that America's story is told through the voices of the people who experienced it. And so that is something that that we will do to the best of our ability, and will rely on the survivors to tell their stories to us so that we can make sure that it is represented in a proper way. Again, I am so honored to be here with you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Madam Secretary. I'll pass the mic over to Senator Bennett if you would like to share anything, and then we can kind of go down the line of the principles.
Sure, I'll be very brief. First of all, Secretary Holland, thank you for that beautiful statement of the purpose of this whole event. And to Ken and Carlene, thank you for your advocacy and for representing a lot of people that can't be here today and did not live to see this day. I just will say that the longer that I've lived and the longer that I've thought about American history, the more I thought that it has been a struggle, but from the very beginning of this country, between the highest ideals that humanity has ever aspired to and humanity's worst instincts at the same time. And that has been our struggle since we wrote a constitution with those beautiful words, and at the same time we were enslaving human beings. And it's the story of Amache. At the time we were fighting a war in theory against fascism, but we're having internment camps in the United States of America. So that's why I believe this is so incredibly important. And when you think about it, it's not even ancient history. The people that are on this call today in this conversation were people that were children, just as my mother was at the same time. The decision that Roosevelt made to do this was within 20 years or so of when I was born, yet a lot of American people don't know this history. And I think that's what's going to be made possible. And as Carlene said, not a moment too soon, because while we hope everybody lives forever, we know that won't happen. And what happened at Amache is something that is going to live forever. And as a result of that, hopefully will never be repeated.
Yeah, and I won't, Madam Secretary, your words were very moving. Michael, your words are moving too, and I didn't mean it in any way. That's a horrible thing when you praise.
So you can say that your words were less moving.
No, your words were moving as well. Anyway, I've been a believer of historic buildings and preservation ever since I can remember, because I think once you are in a place where something happened, something great or something evil, when you breathe that air or feel that sense, that space, even if the trees are different and the buildings change, it puts you in touch with what has happened. And I think this is one of the most powerful things we can do, to never something like the internment of the Japanese. We never experienced something like that again.
Thank you, Congressman Neguse. I saw you unmuted.
Yeah, I would just say I'd echo the remarks, of course, of both of our senators and concur with what Senator Hickenlooper said. Madam Secretary's remarks are just incredibly moving and touching, and gives you even more pause to reflect on the journey in terms of this bill and frankly the effort to preserve Amache long before the legislation was first introduced. I think it's, as I said at the outset, a credit to the survivors and to Ken and Darlene and so many others who have shown a real courage and bravery and their willingness to continue to tell their stories and their family stories. And I think that is in no small part why the bill moved as quickly as it did in the Congress. That sense of urgency. It was born from hearing the stories from the survivors and from descendants and others. And I I think Representative Buck touched on this at the outset during his remarks as well. It's the National Historic Site ultimately plays two roles. I mean, it's critically important for us to remember and to reflect on this dark chapter in American history to ensure that something like it never happens again. But it also is an incredible opportunity to celebrate the survivors and the families who did remarkable things in their lifetimes and contributed to our country in innumerable ways, each of whom are proud patriots and people whom we lionize rightfully today. So I think my hope is that the National Historic Site, the designation offered by the legislation, will enable a new generation of young people to have access to this part of the historical record that perhaps has been lost to history from time to time. And what a great opportunity to enable that.
Thank you. Congressman Buck, please.
Thank you. And thank you, Tracy. And thank you, Madam Secretary, for your remarks. Truly touching and I appreciate it very much. I really want to thank Ken and Carlene for your statements. It's one thing to know a number, and it's one thing to look at an old building. It's another thing to hear the personal sacrifice, the agony of being displaced, of ripped apart from your community, placed in a foreign land. I don't think Colorado has a foreign land, but I'm sure others do. I appreciate learning that it's windy in Colorado at times, but I think it's so important that we hear the personal stories that give those buildings the flavor, the sense of what this is all about. And I agree with my friend Senator Bennett that this country was founded on a very simple idea, and that is that we strive for freedom. And the government's role is to guarantee that freedom, not to take that freedom away. And in so many ways, our government in the past couple hundred years or more has taken that freedom away. And we need to continue to fight every day to preserve that freedom, to enhance that freedom, to celebrate that freedom. And hearing your stories are just another example of how we need to do what our founders envisioned and what so many people have sacrificed their lives in this country and overseas to fight for this very unique experiment that we have. And I just really bless both of you and ask you to tell your story as often as you can, and we will do the same for you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Congressman. I'm going to move over to the descendants on our roundtable today. As descendants of Amachi, and this is for Derek and Mitch and Calvin, and Stacy is a descendant of other incarceration sites. Can you share a little bit about how the Japanese American incarceration experience has personally affected you? So it's a huge question, I know, in a very small amount of time. And then also maybe if you could reflect on how those who are not descendants, like myself and others, those who are not in the immediate community, how can they be supportive? And I'd like to start with Derek, and then we can go Mitch, Calvin, and Stacy. Thank you.
Thanks, Tracy. And I just want to thank Secretary Holland for your comments. Truly, one, we were excited that you were appointed, and then two, that you're with us. We really feel that. As far as the question, I think the biggest thing is I've realized that trauma truly does pass down through generations, and it passed down through 3 generations in our family. And I'm still discovering the ways in which it's impacting us, me and my siblings and my cousins. I mean, we're still discovering that every day, and our family as a whole continues to heal individually and jointly, as we go through this. Secondly, just seeing what happened in Congress over this last few months was the persistence, the hard work, that the joint efforts really helps with that healing. It really helps us hear that we were being listened to, that the history is something that will not be forgotten. And it also provides us with a sense of, hope, belief, and gratitude that in our elected leadership, in our appointed leadership, that on both sides of the aisle, there's a reason to be joyous and there's a reason to be hopeful. And I thank you for that.
Great, thank you. And Madam Secretary, senators and congressmen, I really appreciate all the work that you've done on your end too. This week has been mind-spinning and unbelievable for some of us that have been in the long journey with this. But Tracy's first question, of course, for me personally, the family's World War II experience, changed our family history forever, and thus mine, right? And at the top level, I never knew my grandfather Homa. He died in Amache at the age of 44, right? He was an Amache dentist. And growing up, I grew up in one of my great grandfather's Baptist churches, and I had heard many stories about the family from other church members, and received a lot of questions from other church members and didn't know how to answer them because the family never ever talked about the World War II years. And I understand that as I grew up. My grandmother didn't want to talk about her parents being arrested by the FBI, her being split up from all her siblings into different internment camps. My father certainly didn't want to remember Amache, as his father died there when he was 7 years old. And, of course, the family lost everything, the dental practice, their house, and they relocated to Seattle after the war. But even amongst all the tragic losses, what I learned and what they showed me is their faith, their commitment to each other, and their responsibility to the community never ever wavered. And that has always stuck with me. I witnessed their strength, the ability to rise above everything. Some of the Sunday night dinners, because they were a really close bunch of siblings, were some of my most cherished memories. I was frequently reminded, that, the American Baptists brought the family to the U.S. to serve the community, and that myself and my cousins needed to carry that on to not only the Japanese American community, but the whole community. And that leads to the second part of your question, Tracy. Kind of be summed up as, all people need to live up to this country's ideals. We need to be supportive of each other, make this country better, having all communities be inclusive and contribute to the growth of this nation. My family was always very good at pointing out all the people that helped the family during these years. The American Baptist home missionaries that they knew in Japan that were serving in the US because they were kicked out of Japan. They were the only visitors the family had while they were in prison. They came to visit the family when they were at Amache too. The church people who packed up all their belongings and sent them to Seattle after the war. Otherwise, I would have nothing from Japan and stuff like that. The Baptists who helped the family survive after their release to Amache and gave them the church that helped them live in the church that they lived in for 10 years until they could rebuild their lives. And so I grew up also seeing how fortunate the family was to have compassionate people and the church supporting them. And I thank you guys for not only supporting the Japanese community, but making this story available to all of America. Thank you.
Thank you, Mitch. Calvin, please. Love to hear from you.
Thank you, Tracy. It's a very complicated concept of how the trauma of the incarceration is passed on to descendants. I've read quite a few books and articles about it. I'm just going to share some personal things that were part of my journey through this. When I was a teenage boy, maybe 14 or 15, my dad, who our whole life growing up raised our family as Americans, and we scarcely had any identity of being Japanese. But he came up to me and he dropped this big book on my desk and said, "You need to read this." And it was Bill Hosokawa's book, Nisei, The Quiet Americans. Everybody in Colorado knows Bill Hosokawa from his time with the Denver Post. So it was my first exposure to the incarceration of Executive Order 9066. My first reaction was incredible anger. I couldn't believe something like that was done to my family, much less American citizens. And so for a long time after that, it made me think about my Japanese heritage and culture and race, which had been of no importance to me up to that point. Many years later, my dad, who did not like to talk about the incarceration, but was active, very active in the preservation of Amache, told me a story. He was preparing to ship out to Germany to join the Army of Occupation in Germany. And he went down, he was living with his family in Fort Lupton, Colorado. They were not incarcerated, but my paternal grandmother was, because she had stayed behind in California to look after a boarding house that the family owned. So she was swept up by 1966. So my dad wanted to go down and visit her. He went down in his Army Greens and he was turned away at the gate. And he told me that he had to say goodbye to his mother before shipping out through the barbed wire fence. And that created a lot of dissonance in me, because I love my father and I hated to see his pain, but I love my country. And I hated to think that it had done that. I don't know how you reconcile those kind of things. It's just something we live with. But I know I got my love of country from my father and my mother. So I guess that's a testament to a healing process, that I believe that this act that has just passed will help for everybody involved. Thank you very much.
I just want to say that as a descendant of my mom was at Tule Lake and Topaz, and my dad was at Heart Mountain. So as a descendant, this is a very emotional call, hearing all these stories. And that is part of what this generational trauma is. So for me, the being incarcerated kind of created this wall for both my parents. They had this wall of shame that prevented them from properly really communicating their feelings, and it affected their level of trust and their ability to share. So it really informed their parenting. And it was just too traumatic for them to talk about what happened during the incarceration with us. Obviously, they wanted us to know about it and to learn about it. And so we learned about it from books and whatnot, but not directly from them. So they had to navigate this road of being proud of being Japanese, but also being shameful of being Japanese and feeling that shame. And that lasted their whole lives. I'm not ashamed for being emotional right now, because it just shows how important this bill is. And it shows how important it is for us to remember our stories. And, even if my parents were still alive, I wouldn't really still even be able to ask them about their internment experience, because they still wouldn't be able to talk about it. And I know there are still a lot of people who were not only in the camps, but also descendants, where this is just very hard to talk about, obviously. So what I didn't get from my parents because of their incarceration was the gift of who they really were. And that I will never get back. None of us will ever get that back, especially the people who lived through the incarceration. So what I would hope going forward is that we teach about the incarceration in schools, that we will never have another situation. And I have had it, I'm sure many of you have, where we, like I said earlier, you meet someone and they have no idea what happened. They don't know what any of these 10 concentration camps were. So we hope that, I would hope that we teach this in school. It's something that is learned. It's something that, even though it was shameful, that we don't forget about it, so that we can, we've all been saying this is the whole reason why this act is so important, because we as Americans need to embrace and learn from the horrible things that we've done so that we don't ever do them again. And I very much appreciate everybody on this call. I know we're short on time, so I just want to say thank you so much for everyone on this call for what you've been doing. And I really appreciate it.
Stacy, thank you. Thank you so much. Your generosity and all of your generosity, all the Amache survivors and descendants and those in the Japanese American community. I know, like, I can't even summarize how generous and just incredible the amount of heart and advocacy into getting us here where we are today, and way before. I just really admire your willingness to be with us and to share what is obviously very traumatic and not easy for anyone probably to talk about. And me being an outsider, and you just, partnering with us and other groups on this is just, I just will be forever grateful to know you all. I do want to transfer over to one last question, and I know we just have like 6 minutes, so I'm sorry to rush, but I do want to just share the mic with Alexa Roberts. So Alexa, as the former Sand Creek Massacre National Historic Site superintendent, that's a national park that's not far away from Amache, and we talk about the Amache landscape. So, as the former superintendent, as in your role with the foundation today, I mean, you have reflected a bit on how each place, of course, is very much its own story. There does seem to be some shared history between the sites and some connection. I just wondered if you could take a couple minutes, if you wouldn't mind sharing just a little bit about that connection.
Well, thank you so much, Tracy. I thank you for inviting me to be on this very distinguished panel. It's quite an honor. Thank you also, of course, to Senators Bennett and Senator Hickenlooper, Congressman Neguse, Congressman Buck, for all your leadership in the passage of this historic act, and also to Secretary Holland, of course, for all the leadership yet to come. And then, of course, thank you to John Hopper and the Amache Preservation Society and all of the descendants and the descendant organizations who have worked for so many years for your leadership, your stewardship, and unfailing faith that one day your vision would become reality, and now it is. I remember that feeling when the legislation passed to establish the Sand Creek Massacre National Historic Site, and the day that the Secretary of Interior published the final establishment notice in the Federal Register. It was quite a feeling, and I imagine that the Amache descendants are feeling much the same way at this moment, and I want to congratulate you all for all of your work and persistence over the years. But the process of National Historic Site establishment is a minor similarity between the Amache Interment Site and the Sand Creek Massacre Site in comparison to their meanings. The compelling connection between the two places, besides their proximity, includes their stories, the multi-generational impacts of the United States actions against Native Americans and Japanese American victims and their descendants, and their power to memorialize, educate, and heal. I believe the power is magnified by the close proximity of the sites to one another. The fact that the sites of the two atrocities, both of which the United States has designated, both of which the United States accepted responsibility for causing, and both of which the United States has designated as public icons in the nation's history, whose stories must be told, are only 40 miles and less than 80 years apart, reminds us how easily history can repeat itself if we forget our history and are not careful to protect our nation's ideals. These parallels were described by Derek Okubo during Amachi's National Historic Landmark dedication in 2006 and by Mr. Richard Wu following a visit in 2010 to both places by Cheyenne and Arapaho descendants and Japanese American descendants and philanthropists. He described both descendant communities' shared experiences of multi-generational trauma, the sacredness of both places, and the power of paying respect at each one. Both Mr. Okubo and Mr. Wu articulated the essential need for memorialization and the importance of acknowledgement of atrocities that should never have been perpetrated in order for healing to be possible. The establishment of both National Historic Sites acknowledges the need for remembering the moments in our history that should never be repeated, and for preserving sacred places for respectful memorialization so that education and healing may continue through future generations. Only through this process can both sites contribute to their shared missions to help prevent such atrocities from ever occurring again. And I just also wanted to just add a note that, of course, you're all familiar that with the name Amache, the daughter of Cheyenne Chief Lone Bear killed at Sand Creek in 1864, and that her name has been adopted for the Grenada War Relocation Center could not be more appropriate. Her entry in the Colorado Women's Hall of Fame for activism and advocacy notes that she never forgot the injustices of ethnic genocide. And I think that's very emblematic of the connection on so many levels between both the Sand Creek Massacre site and the Amache National Historic Site. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Alexa, for being here. And I know we're a bit out of time. I want to thank all of you for being here today, but definitely want to thank Secretary Holland for your leadership and your heart on this issue, and certainly Senators Bennett and Hickenlooper and Congressman Neguse and Buck, just the dream team of all of you. Just such an inspiration. I'll close it out. Actually, Senator Bennett, do you have any closing comments for us?
Thank you. I'm going to be very brief, but thank you, Tracy, for organizing this conversation and for the other conversations that you've hosted. We really appreciate it. Secretary Holland, thank you again for being here. And to the Amache survivors and the descendants, your testimony just today was so powerful that I hope that every school child in America has a chance to hear this. I want to end just with a few words from a speech that I know some of you have heard before, but I thought the secretary might not have heard it before. And this was a speech that Senator Cory Gardner shared with me several years ago. And you should know, by the way, Ken Buck said thank you to him because he handed this over. As recently as this week, Senator Gardner, former Senator Gardner, was in the Republican cloakroom in Washington telling people how important this piece of legislation is. So I too want to thank him for that. But these words, Madam Secretary, were from a commencement address written by Marion Konishi, the valedictorian at Amache Senior High School, which she wrote while interned at Amache. And here's what Marion wrote in 1943 about America. Sometimes America failed and suffered. Sometimes she made mistakes, great mistakes, but she always admitted them and tried to rectify all the injustice that flowed from them. Her history is full of errors, but with each mistake, she's learned and has marched forward onward toward a goal of security and peace and a society of free men where the understanding that all men are created equal and understanding that all men, whatever their race, color, or religion, be given an equal opportunity to serve themselves and each other according to their needs and abilities. And she finished by asking her classmates, can we, the graduating class of Amache Senior High School, still believe that America means freedom, equality, security, and justice? Do I believe this? Do my classmates believe this? Yes, with all our hearts, because in that faith and that hope is my future, our future, and the world's future. Even as our government detained Marionette Amache, she refused to give up on what this country stands for. And I think it means that all of us were fortunate enough to hear Marion's story and the story of nearly 10,000 Americans interned at Amache have a responsibility to fight for a country that lives up to those high expectations. Thank you, everybody, for being here today.